I woke to a strange metallic click at the edge of my sleep, the sound faint but unmistakable. My heart tightened as I realized what it was. Somebody was tampering with our front door. I shot upright, sweat prickling my skin despite the cool morning air. The first face I saw when I swung the blinds open made my blood run cold. HOA Karen, flabby and haughty, her oversized body pressing against our locked door, keys in hand, as if she owned the place. Her face was a mix of smug determination and blind entitlement, the kind that made grown men want to throw up in their shoes. I blinked, making sure I wasn't dreaming. She was really here, in the flesh, thinking she could just walk into our home and bend reality to her will. "Get away from my house," I shouted, barreling toward the door. Karen flinched, but didn't budge, her hand on the doorknob. She wasn't just testing locks, she was testing my patience, my family, and the limits of sanity. The children, still groggy from sleep, peeked around the corner, eyes wide with fear. My son, 11 but sharp and fearless, slipped quietly beside me. "Dad," he whispered, "let me handle it." I hesitated. He was just a kid, but something in his eyes told me he had already conceived a plan that I would come to admire. I took a deep breath and let him step forward. Karen laughed, a high, cruel bark that filled the morning air. "Oh, what? You think a child can stop me?" she sneered. Her arrogance was thick enough to choke on. I wanted to leap at her and rip those keys from her hand, but my son moved with the precision and calm that only a truly clever mind could muster. He wasn't just going to yell or throw things. She had set a trap. Years of tinkering, hacking, and lockpicking with a curious mind had prepared him for this moment. With a subtle gesture, he activated the small but powerful device he had built, a noise alarm linked to our smart locks. The moment Karen inserted the key, a shrill, unrelenting siren erupted from every corner of our home. Lights flashed, cameras pivoted, and our security system broadcasted her every move to our phones and the nearby neighbors. The shriek was deafening, and Karen's face twisted in shock and panic. She yanked at the keys, but the smart lock had jammed automatically as designed, trapping her hand in a bizarre, almost cartoonish way that made her squeal and hop back like a startled cat. I felt my chest heave with a mix of relief and awe. My son had outsmarted her before she even realized the danger. But the morning wasn't done. HOA Karen, never one to admit defeat, shouted threats and insults, insisting she would call the cops, the HOA board, the mayor, anything to reclaim her sense of imagined authority. At that moment, our neighbor, Mr. Lawson, leaned out from his porch. He was a retired detective with a reputation for patience and an eye for overreach. He calmly said into his phone, "Yes, I'm recording everything. HOA Karen is attempting illegal entry. Dispatch is on notice." Her eyes went wide. She hadn't accounted for witnesses, for evidence, for reality itself pushing back against her entitlement. The situation escalated as she frantically tried to remove her hand from the jammed lock, yanking and twisting, her weight pressing against the door, leaving Karen-shaped dents in the frame. Meanwhile, the sirens blared, security cameras clicked, and my son monitored everything with a calmness I envied. I could see the rage building in Karen, her face turning red, her breathing sharp, the picture of hysteria disguised as authority. And then, just as she seemed ready to lash out physically, another twist occurred. Our house cat, a feisty little Siamese with the temperament of a lion, leaped from a window ledge and landed squarely on her shoulder. Karen shrieked, stumbled backward, and smacked into a decorative planter, sending soil and flowers flying like a small explosion of justice. Neighbors emerged, drawn by the sirens, the shouting, the chaos. They saw Karen, flailing and trapped by her own hubris, caught between a locked door, a clever child, and a vengeful feline. Cameras flashed, and whispers spread like wildfire. Social media posts started before she had even left, her humiliation captured from every angle. Every threat she spat out only made her seem more absurd, more overbearing, more deserving of ridicule. My son, still calm, glanced at me and whispered, "She won't forget this, will she?" I shook my head, smiling through the tension. No, she wouldn't. The lesson was etched into the morning air. Arrogance and entitlement have consequences, and intelligence, courage, and clever planning can turn the tables in an instant. HOA Karen, for all her bluster, had underestimated the smallest, smartest, most determined member of our family. I stepped forward finally, placing a reassuring hand on my son's shoulder. "Good job," I said, pride swelling in my chest. The neighbors clapped, some laughed, and Karen's face went from red to pale as she realized her defeat wasn't just physical, it was total, public, and irreversible. Even the HOA officers who had followed her hesitated, unsure what to do when their leader was reduced to a flailing, panicked figure in a pile of dirt and flower pots. The wooden sign we had hastily set up by the door, reading "Hands off our home," now seemed almost prophetic. It had captured the essence of the morning: defiance, cleverness, and the undeniable truth that no one, no matter how entitled, could break into a home guarded by wit, courage, and family. HOA Karen's retreat was as humiliating as it was final, a spectacle for the neighborhood and a lesson for anyone who might try to emulate her hubris. Even after she disappeared down the street, still muttering threats and promises of revenge, the energy in our home was transformative. The tension dissolved into laughter, shared stories, and hugs that lingered. My son had not only protected our home, but also taught a lesson in resourcefulness, courage, and the power of using one's mind before muscles. In the following days, HOA Karen's attempts to salvage her reputation fell flat. Social media posts documented her misadventure. Neighbors recounted the spectacle with amusement and admiration for our family's ingenuity, and the HOA board began receiving complaints about her conduct. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly, and the narrative of the entitled bully undone. My family gathered each evening afterward, still marveling at the morning's events, and I realized that justice sometimes arrives in unexpected forms: smart, small, and unstoppable when guided by courage and principle. The lesson was clear: don't underestimate those who are underestimated, and never assume that authority can act without accountability. The sun had barely climbed above the horizon, casting long shadows across our yard, yet the aftermath of that morning lingered in every corner. HOA Karen had retreated down the street, muttering to herself, but the memory of her defeat was etched into the minds of everyone who had watched the scene unfold. My son sat cross-legged on the porch steps, his face glowing with pride and a touch of mischief. He had been the architect of our victory, the unexpected hero in a story that could have gone disastrously wrong. I couldn't stop marveling at his composure, his quick thinking, and his audacious courage, all channeled perfectly to confront a force of entitlement far larger than himself. The neighborhood, normally quiet and polite to the point of stagnation, had erupted in whispers and murmurs that morning. Word spread faster than wildfire. Within hours, photos and videos from security cameras, smartphones, and even a few brave neighbors were circulating on social media, showing Karen flailing helplessly, trapped in our doorway with the planter tipped over and our Siamese perched triumphantly on her shoulder. The image was almost comical if it weren't so satisfying. Memes were born, captions written, and hashtags created before noon. "Hands off our home" trended locally, and people began calling us for interviews, some seeking the story, others just seeking validation that entitlement could indeed be toppled by wit, courage, and unity. Karen, predictably, did not take the exposure well. She tried to salvage her reputation by claiming she was conducting an inspection authorized by the HOA, insisting that the photos had been staged and that she was a victim of misrepresentation. But every angle told the truth. She had been caught in the act, her own hands on the lock, her fury and panic entirely unplanned, her authority nullified by witnesses, recordings, and a well-timed family defense. Even her board members avoided defending her, their silence more damning than any words could have been. Meanwhile, my son became a quiet celebrity in our little enclave. His methodical planning, his technological ingenuity, and his calm bravery under pressure became the talk of the street. Neighbors would stop by to shake his hand, sometimes bringing snacks or small tokens of appreciation. He never boasted, never gloated, he simply acknowledged their admiration with a smile and a nod. In many ways, he embodied the principle we had all learned that day. True strength does not roar, it acts. It does not threaten, it executes. It does not intimidate, it inspires. In the days that followed, we fortified our home further. Smart locks were updated, cameras repositioned, and motion sensors enhanced. It wasn't out of fear, it was out of respect for what could happen when entitlement went unchecked, but also to remind ourselves that vigilance, preparation, and ingenuity could serve as shields as powerful as any physical barrier. HOA Karen, meanwhile, escalated her attempts to assert control in the digital and social realm, sending emails and notices threatening lawsuits, fines, and claims of defamation. But each attempt backfired spectacularly. The neighborhood had evidence, public attention, and legal guidance in our corner, and Karen's messages were treated as more entertainment than threat. Unexpectedly, a figure from the past stepped into the scene, adding a new layer to the drama. Mrs. Beatrice Caldwell, our former neighbor and an influential local attorney, had been watching from afar. She had been involved in previous HOA disputes and had seen the consequences of unchecked authority firsthand. She contacted us personally, offering pro bono guidance to ensure that HOA Karen would face real accountability, not just public ridicule. Her advice was strategic, her insight invaluable, and her presence a reminder that justice was not always immediate but could be methodically pursued to its fullest conclusion. Armed with Mrs. Caldwell's guidance, we documented every interaction, every threat, and every attempt at intimidation. Letters were drafted, complaints filed, and formal notices sent to HOA Karen, her board, and the HOA's legal representatives. Each document outlined the illegality of her actions, the harassment she had attempted, and the psychological distress inflicted upon my family. It was meticulous, thorough, and unassailable. The legal path, often slow and grueling, became our ally in cementing the morning's victory into long-term protection and reform. Karen's response was frantic. She tried to manipulate local media, spreading false narratives about being a victim, painting our family as overreacting and hostile. But the overwhelming evidence, coupled with multiple eyewitness accounts, rendered her attempts futile. Even her attempts to recruit sympathetic neighbors were met with polite refusals or outright confrontation, as people had witnessed firsthand the chaos she had unleashed. Her credibility deteriorated rapidly, and the HOA board, sensing their own reputations at risk, began distancing themselves from her entirely. The neighborhood's energy shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. Children played more freely outside. Neighbors talked openly about previous abuses they had endured, and a new sense of communal responsibility emerged. Meetings that once validated Karen's whims now became forums for discussion, accountability, and transparency. Residents began reviewing HOA policies, proposing reforms, and instituting checks against unilateral power. What had started as a personal defense became a catalyst for collective empowerment. My son, still glowing with the quiet satisfaction of a battle well won, approached me one evening as the sun dipped low, painting our house in amber light. "Dad," he said softly, "do you think she'll ever try something like that again?" I smiled, ruffling his hair, the pride in my chest nearly overwhelming. "I think she's learned her lesson," I said, though I knew the lesson wasn't merely about this house or this street. It was about hubris, the overestimation of one's own authority, and the underestimated power of those who act with courage and intelligence. In the following months, HOA Karen's presence dwindled. She attempted to salvage her reputation through minor community service announcements and social media posts, but the community had moved on. Her threats of lawsuits were largely ignored, and her attempts to regain influence were met with polite but firm resistance. The board, now aware of the risks of unchecked authority, adopted new policies to prevent future abuses, and several members resigned voluntarily, unwilling to be associated with her tactics. Our family, though still shaken by the intensity of that morning, grew stronger from the experience. The fear that had gripped us transformed into resilience, the anger into resolve, and the humiliation of confrontation into empowerment. The house itself, our sanctuary, stood firm not just as a physical structure, but as a symbol of ingenuity, courage, and the protective power of family bonds. Looking back, the lesson was undeniable. Arrogance, entitlement, and the abuse of authority can only thrive where compliance and silence reign. When confronted with intelligence, preparation, and courage, even the most imposing forces crumble. HOA Karen had overestimated herself, underestimated a child's ingenuity, and failed to consider the power of community and law. In her defeat lay a broader truth about human behavior. Those who act without consideration for justice will eventually face consequences, and those who stand prepared, united, and clever can turn the tide. So, dear reader, after witnessing how a single child, a family, and a supportive community dismantled entitlement and arrogance in a single morning, I leave you with this question. When faced with abuse of power, would you stand silently, or would you devise your own way to ensure justice prevails? Share your thoughts, because the line between right and wrong often depends on who has the courage to act and who refuses to be intimidated.